Roz, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted. Here we go. Do it again. Do it again.
Welcome to the village. Hey, happy Tuesday. Welcome, Dr. Jones.
Hey, Dr. Roz.
Welcome, everyone, to the village. We are live. We're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's right. We're talking about our ESOL and our special education students. And we want to make sure that we are doing all that we can to make sure we are engaging all learners. That's right. So today we're continuing our conversation about inclusion. Last week, y'all joined us. And this week, this is part 2. We're kicking it off. And again, we're promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is the ESOL and SPED edition, all right? Again, welcome to the village. Well, what is the village? I know what you're saying. We are a professional learning community, and we coach teacher leaders so that they can maximize their strengths, develop leadership skills, and reignite their passion for teaching so they can have a greater impact in their schools and communities. Now listen, I'm Dr. Roz. I know y'all used to seeing me, but I have my girl, Dr. Jones, here with us to talk about inclusion. So, Dr. Jones, introduce yourself to the village, reintroduce yourself to the village, because you're not a stranger, but reintroduce yourself to the village and tell us about this topic. Like, why are we talking about this?
Hi, everybody. It's Tyi-Sanna Jones. And it's crazy that we're talking about this. And one of the questions we're going to get into later is we keep hearing D&I, D&I, D&I. What is D&I? It's not a new thing. It's been repurposed and revisited so many times. But I want to give us a definition that we can kind of work from today. So when we're just hearing this D&I, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity quickly are recognizing that practices recognize the beauty of differences, including social norms, expectations, language, culture. All those things fit underneath diversity. Also disability. But disability can also be looked at specifically under inclusion. In a school setting, we think about inclusion about special students with special needs or students who have exceptionalities being included in the general population in general education classes. What does that mean? What does that look like? Is it more than just sitting there, or what are students supposed to get regardless of where they are as far as their disability and how it's impacted? And then we're really looking at equity. Equity is that thing that kind of pulls all this stuff together. We look at our equity work. It really ties together. How do we do diversity? How do we address diversity? How do we address inclusion? So think of equity practices as the structures, or looking at the structures and the practices that make these things work and change the structures of what we know today in our schools, our corporations, our companies, our businesses, and how we just interact typically with one another. So this is best practice. These are the words for best practice, and we're going to continue the conversation as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Love it. Thank you, Dr. Jones. See, this is why I had her here. All right, so I'm ready to take notes. I hope you guys are ready to dig in. But wait, we have some special guests. So we want to welcome our guests. Welcome to the village. Y'all come on in.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey. Welcome to the village, family. Welcome. Thanks for joining our conversation today. Thank you for bringing your wisdom, your expertise to the village. Now, we're all about collaborating, and we only bring in the best. So thank you for joining us. Now, I want you guys to quickly introduce yourselves to the village and give us a juicy nugget that you want us to take away. Like, what is something that you want us to know as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I would like for Miss Erin to start us off. Introduce yourself. Welcome to the village, Erin.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you inviting me here today, Dr. Roz. I'm Erin Graham. I am currently serving as an ESOL instructional specialist in Prince George's County Public Schools, which essentially means that I support in the program implementation of ESOL at the 19 high schools in Prince George's County that have ESOL programs. And that number is growing and growing as our students return to their boundary schools for some students. One nugget that I would like to kind of share with everyone this evening is that culture is essential to who we are as people, regardless to what culture you're from. And that impacts how we interact in the educational arena. So if people really get to know their students' culture, it will help you to better include, if we use one of our words for the evening, our English learners or our multilingual learners in the our educational setting. I'm going to mute myself because there's a thunderstorm going on outside, and I don't want y'all to hear that.
Same here. So again, thank you. Welcome again, Erin. Thank you so much for coming. And Erin and I used to work together, so I know she knows her stuff. And that's why I invited her, because again, she's passionate about this topic, and I always go to her when I have a question. So thanks again, Erin, for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Next up, Dr. Cotton. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. Welcome to the Village. Please introduce yourself to the Village.
Hi, Village. My name is Dr. Nakia Simmons Cotton, and I am the owner and founder of EduFaith Educational Services, which is a consulting services to help with students with disabilities, Section 504s, with transition and getting into high schools, as well as coaching teacher leaders and students, with disabilities. So I just cover a plethora of educational things. I'm also an author, but my quick nugget, and I'll go through my book later, but my quick nugget is that relationships matter with diversity and inclusion. And so I am a proud believer that relationships encompasses everything and makes a difference with anyone in life, whether it's a student, an adult, but especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion, relationships are foundational and they matter.
Love it. Love it. Thank you for that nugget, because that's the foundation. So I appreciate it. And again, thank you for joining us today. And last but not least, she's not a stranger to the Village. She's been here before. So welcome back, Jewlana Smith-Hunter.
Thank you so much.
Introduce yourself to the Village, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross, for inviting me back. And hello, Village family. I'm so excited to be here with you again today. And I am Jewlana Smith-Hunter, your educational equity evolutionist. That's right, evolutionist, because to change the historical practices that have been in place, it is going to take an evolution, which takes time. So there's no way we can think that implementing a few things this year is going to change the narrative. So I help educators, just like many of you who are a part of the Village family, use the power of positive psychology and empathy to effectively evolve an educational ecosystem of equity, leveraging the people, practices, and policies you have right now to accelerate diversity, equity, and inclusion in your school. So clients of the Equity Elevator Consulting, they leave saying, I can elevate equity every day in teaching and learning. So I really believe we can eradicate inequities in education globally. So many educators and districts are committing equity fraud because their approach is only addressing the tip of the iceberg. So when it comes to responding to the true needs of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as Dr. Jones mentioned earlier, we need to see some different changes in teaching and learning. So after this discussion, I want you to walk away understanding the three main factors needed to ensure you are engineering an equitable ecosystem of teaching and learning for your multilingual learners, as well as your special ed students. And so I'm also an author of a book. I'll talk about that later. And so we'll dive in a little bit deeper about those three main things leaders can leverage: people, practices, and policies to create that equitable ecosystem.
Wow, I cannot wait. Okay. So thanks again for coming back to the Village. I so appreciate it. And I believe you taught me that equity is a mindset from our last conversation. So I appreciate you so much. We're going to get started. Dr. Jones, take it away.
Absolutely. So you guys have already brought up some things. So one, before D&I became this buzzword that we keep hearing last year, after the response to George Floyd and the many police brutality cases, how are these conversations truly being handled related to diversity and inclusion and equity in your school districts or places that you've worked with, as far as other school districts you may work with? And tell me what area you're in. You might not, don't name your school district, and from the school district you want to talk about, keep them together, keep them anonymous if we can, or things that you may have just seen prior to this this new language that you hear floating around as far as D&I is concerned.
Yes, I know that I'm here in Metro Atlanta, and I have had the privilege of speaking to leaders and educators across the U.S., and many believe that they are already doing what's best for students. So when they hear the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, they believe we already do that because we love our kids and we have this passion for all kids to learn. Yet the evidence does not support that that is true for our minority and diverse learners.
Yeah. Has anybody else seen this? What you, Erin?
Unmute myself. I agree, and one thing that a discussion I was having, we as educators oftentimes are very well-meaning, but we're hurtful because we don't know we don't know. We don't know what we don't know, so we're not making the best decisions that we should make for not only our students who have learning differentials or have some sort of differential, but also our multilingual learners, because we're not as knowledgeable as we should be about their specific needs as a group, but also as individuals.
Thank you. And Dr. Cotton.
Yes,
Can I do a follow-up, Dr. Jones?
Yes.
If you don't mind. Because Erin brought up a good point, is that we're not, taking care or meeting the needs of our students and really understanding their individual needs. And so, some teachers, they love their students, they're trying their best, but I want to hear from you guys, what is that thing that's, that big challenge? I'm thinking about maybe the teachers don't have the proper training, they don't have the proper resources. So what is stopping our teachers from taking that next step, as you mentioned, Erin, as far as meeting the needs of those students, those individual or specific needs?
The first step to making change is admitting you have a problem. So,
yeah, that's good.
So the problem is self-awareness. Really digging through the filters and looking at yourself and seeing what are your personal biases and being self-aware and shifting your mindset. Because if you don't acknowledge you have a problem, you're going to keep doing the same thing, and we call that chaos. So the first thing is acknowledging there is a problem. There is a problem with diversity and inclusion for students, and we have not landed where we need to be in education. So the first step is awareness, self-awareness.
Absolutely. One of my favorite activities I would do with my students when I taught the university was having them look at their identity and then naming those identities that influence them the most, and then also looking at an event that happened that was predicated in their culture or it made them question something. And so your first experience when you knew you were Black, like, how did you know? What did that mean? Or one of those, like, if you realized you were gay, like, what did that mean when you had to come against something different? And that just really starts an awesome conversation within our classroom that gets people thinking about who's in their classroom. And so, those are the kind of activities to me that bring out that self-awareness, that everything isn't just kumbaya. Even if you have the same culture, now you add different ethnicities or different backgrounds altogether, rich, poor, just all that, just other, it changes the dynamics of how people just see themselves, let alone how they interact with the world. And so that self-awareness is so huge, Dr. Cotton, so big.
And honesty, because once you're self-aware, you got to be honest. Like, we're not where we need to be. Some teachers think, I got this, my class is great. And then half the class is failing. You got to be honest, looking at data. So self-awareness and just being honest, remove all those barriers, the filters, all the extra stuff, and peeling back and just honestly looking at what you can do, what your biases are, and being self-aware. That's how you're going to make some changes.
Absolutely. And you mentioned data. I would like someone to speak to how data has been used to kind of figure out where your school is sitting as it relates to who's doing well and who's not doing well, who's in what classes, who's not in those said AP classes, who's in self-contained. Does self-contained look different in one school versus another school? Like, how do we have those conversations as we talk about data?
I know that I have had the privilege of working with a phenomenal leadership team who has been doing this drill down type work, always looking for and combing through the data to see how can we get better and how can we serve our students better. And so one of the things or the experiences that we had was just looking at something that went well and seeing how can we make it better? How can we get more multilingual students in a gifted program? What is it that is the barrier for our kids sitting in our classroom to getting there? Let's analyze that, let's unpack it, and let's backwards plan so that we can actually see the evidence that supports our true value and belief system that all students, if you're multilingual or not, should have access and the opportunity to be a part of the gifted program. So that's just one example. Something else is to think about your multilingual learners in a spectrum. Sometimes we group all of our EL students together or all of our special education students in one pile. They're special ed. But within that description, there is an array of differences within that. So how are you going through that with a fine-tooth comb and thinking about the different subgroups within that and how students are performing and access to different things?
So I really think data is like it's like a double-edged sword, right? Because there's valuable information that comes out of the data, and there are wonderful things that we can do in order to make shifts around the data. But I found that oftentimes educators don't know how to actually look at the data and what types of data there are out there. And that's not necessarily, a dig to anyone, but it's just the reality of what it is. Yes, we have all of our standardized tests and things of that nature, but what other kind of anecdotal data do we have? What other types of data do we have from our buildings? What other things are happening in our buildings to really get a good idea of what are we acknowledging the diversity, and not just acknowledging it, but embracing the diversity in our building. Are we creating an equitable situation for all of our learners in the building? And are we actually including all of our learners in the building? And I think that in our current educational arena, we look a lot at just that standardized data. So that's why I think it's that double-edged sword, because we're looking at things that oftentimes our English learners, our multilingual learners, and our students with disabilities, they struggle in those environments often because they're not the middle of the road student.
Right. So give me some examples of some data that might actually be helpful. Just saying it out loud, because I think, again, people don't know what they don't know. So give us some purposeful data that can actually tell us something about the students that we serve.
I would say definitely school climate surveys. So maybe not assessment surveys, but when we have those students and we do those annual climate surveys and seeing if they feel safe in the school building, and those students are honest, so school climate surveys, feeling safe, feeling included, feeling like they have a voice. That's valuable information, as well as a lot of times they will send surveys to parents. I know with, special needs in Georgia where I am, we send a survey out to special education parents or parents of students with disabilities to get that feedback. So that's just valuable data too, just to see how the parents feel. Do they feel like they're valued in the community? Do they feel like they're in part of the school system, included? So those are the type of surveys I prefer. I'm agreeing with Ms. Graham as far as, sometimes the standardized tests may not be, the scores that we really want to look at for our kids, but just looking at the climate and seeing, assessing their feelings and their thoughts and the parents' feelings and thoughts on how they are included as far as being a part of the school community.
Absolutely. What about things like, do parents show up for IEP meetings, or do parents show up for any? If no one shows up, I think the school might be doing something wrong.
So,
you know
Dr.
what I mean?
Please stop stealing my answers.
I'm
because
sorry.
I was gonna. It's okay. I love you still. I was definitely gonna say, I think that how much, like, looking at your parent and community engagement, like, are they showing up in the building for, like you said, IP meetings, but anything? Are they coming to the basketball game? Are is the community looking to partner with your school to provide opportunities to your students? Like, these are not traditional forms of data, but they are significant because that might be the very thing that pulls a kid into the school, into the education part of school, to encourage them to do something a little bit different, a little bit better, for lack of a better word.
Yes, and to add to that, I also believe that not just the volume of net parent participation who comes to those IEP meetings or school functions, but which types of parents show up. Finding out, knowing that however you communicated that information or whatever experience that parent group had, made a certain population want to come and another population not want to come or not feel welcomed. So diving into and looking at, when we do schedule IEP meetings, when we are talking about student English language proficiency plans, what is it that's happening? Which level of students, parents are involved when we're thinking about linguistics? What demographic shows up for IEP meetings? And how is our messaging enabling or prohibiting other groups to do that? And so when we take that inward look, like Dr. Cotton said earlier, and really be honest and truthful about what our data is saying, and getting that holistic approach. And sometimes that's the beginning of where equity fraud begins. Just like Erin said, is when we only look at one measure. We're looking at this one standardized test when there's so much information around us to tell us about the experience that contributed to that one outcome. And so there are so many ways that we are powerful to change that narrative if we look around at all of the impactors that are around.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, so the data, different kinds of data. So that's definitely a takeaway. Different kinds of data, more than just standardized tests. Looking at how parents are interacting, which parents are interacting. What about? So I've been struggling this week on virtual learning, right? So how do you provide feedback if there's parents who can sit with kids all day and parents who are at work all day? So I can't give. How do I decide? Here's an equity question. How do we decide in grades in a situation where we're really grading the parent's ability to do something or the parent's access to provide to their students? Yeah. And so thinking about what's fair. Equity is a question about being fair and being honest and really paying attention to what we're measuring. So what are some of the challenges that you guys have kind of experienced and thought through in this space of COVID as it relates to providing services for students who are multilingual, as well as students who are have exceptional needs?
Don't everyone speak at the same time.
I'll go. Well, I would say definitely for students with disabilities, it's just been engagement. It's been difficult to keep students, a student with attention deficit disorder, sitting at a computer for 4 or 5 hours or 6 hours and trying to be engaged. So that lack of that social emotional connection, learning that you get when you're around other students, and just having your friends around and that teacher to actually physically be in your space and pat you on the back and give you feedback. Because so just the whole virtual, the social emotional, the access to the internet, the access to technology. I know a lot of school districts provided laptops, but then you give the student a laptop, the hotspot, the parent goes to work and they're supposed to sit on that computer for, 6 hours. And I've also seen the problems with teachers doing dual roles. So they teach students virtually and they're teaching a whole class of maybe 12 students. So the challenges I've seen is just the whole social, emotional, the access, and then just the differentiated instruction or not being able to fully accommodate like you would in a traditional classroom. Not saying traditionals, some students do well virtually, but for a lot of students with disabilities or students or ELL learners, you have to put your finger on them. You got to touch them. You got to, give them that physical space to, give them feedback and keep them engaged. So I just think the engagement has been a problem, and a challenge for students with disabilities along with technology, and then like I said, the struggle with the teachers juggling,
Absolutely. Miss Miss Graham.
So,
I can see it on your forehead. I can see it.
So let's say we have the computer, we have a hotspot, the kid is motivated to be in the classroom. I immediately start to think about my newcomer learners, my newcomer multilingual learners, where there is absolutely no context for the learning to occur. And one of the things that, if you look into some of the research around second language acquisition, Dr. Stephen Krashen talks about how everything has to be very context embedded. I don't have, of course, this is a small example. We're talking about pen. I'm going to pull a pen out. I'm going to have all of this realia in the classroom. I'm going to be doing experiential type of learning. I'm going to be engaging in total physical response. I'm going to be doing a whole lot of things with those students to provide context, to give cues around language that is very hard, virtually impossible to kind of recreate in this virtual environment. My husband is an educator as well. And in the middle of this kind of COVID situation, I was upstairs, he's downstairs. I can hear him teaching. And it's just like, wow, these kids are not multilingual learners. They're not students with disability by far. And it's still just a huge challenge. So it's only exponentially more difficult with that lack of context for multilingual learners. And I'm going to assume, although it's not my area of expertise, the same for students with disabilities. I don't know.
Yes, and to add to that, it takes 3 to 5 years for any new professional learning or new way of teaching, right, for us to see a positive impact. And during the pandemic, let's be honest, we were building that plane as we were trying to fly it. And we weren't really, we were doing the best we could, but my goodness. So teachers really, I applaud classroom teachers. Oh my goodness. They were really just pulling all the resources they had. But now that we have a chance to be proactive and we have a chance to look back and learn from that experience, we can now, through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, think about how can we tap into those resources at local colleges where they have specialized training in instructional technology, right? And they have specialized training in the development and engagement of multilingual learners and ESOL students. How can we tap into that to put together and think about how can we change that narrative of experience? How can we customize learning resources for that special ed teacher who has students with ADHD? How can I engage that student? Right now, teachers were faced with Googling things and just piecemealing things together and doing the best they can, but hope doesn't get kids to mastery, right? Passion doesn't get kids there. So being more intentional and thinking about those specific nuances and how we can tap into those resources around us to help give teachers the tools they need because they want them. They want these tools. They want their students to be successful. And that will also help to address that high level of psychological distress that teachers and students are facing during this difficult time.
Definitely. And now you're hitting on something because I know for me, you, like you said, you care about your students, you want to do the best for your students, and you feel guilty that you're not providing the best. So again, teachers out there, congratulations. The school year is almost over for most of us. But we've done the best we can. So I have teacher guilt because, again, I know Erin have answered my phone calls so many times where I felt bad because I had a student, who's maybe a newcomer or a first year student, and I knew I was not meeting that student's need. And I would vent to Erin and say, what more can I do because again, loving that student and trying my best, I felt like I wasn't doing enough. And so again, we just have to do the best we can. So I believe we do want to get to those 3 points as well. We don't want to forget that as well. Dr. Jones, make sure we get to that. Go ahead, Dr. Jones. Ask the next question. That was good.
Well, no, I wanted to come back to, because I'm looking at the time. And so I wanted to come back to making sure that we had opportunities for our authors to talk about their books, as well as those 3 takeaways that Ms. Smith-Hunter mentioned in the beginning of our conversation. So let's start with Dr. Cotton. Talk about your book, give us some background, where we can get your book, the name of it, all the jazz, and then we'll go to Ms. Smith-Hunter with her book information and the 3 points that we need to know. And that'll be time for us to wrap up our conversation for today.
All right. So my book is called Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders. I dropped it in the chat. I don't know if you guys can see it, but I can re-enter it in the chat. Put it in the comments. Got it. Oh, it's there. Okay. Very good. So I have 2 books, actually. The other one is just brand spanking new, but it's Essential Tips for Special Education Leaders. It is available on Amazon, and it talks about just special education, the background of special education, and how we can better serve our students with disabilities and be a leader. Even if you're an educator, you're a leader, in that environment. So it's for a general education teacher or special education teacher, school leaders, but it talks about the basics of special education leadership and how you can be valuable in some tips just to help you along your way as far as working with our students with disabilities. And then my sophomore book, I haven't even, is on Amazon. I'm going to put the link out, but it's Essential Tips for Section 504 Coordinators. That's my other role. I serve as a District 504 coordinator for a large metro school district. And so I've seen a lot with that as well. So I figure let's do something for special education, but let's also tackle Section 504 and students with disabilities, because that is a growing trend in America, especially right now with the pandemic, with all the emotionality and the mental disorders with students and ADHD. Section 504 is really growing. So Essential Tips for Section 504 Leaders, Coordinators is also on Amazon. I will drop that in the link as well as my contact information.
Thank you so much. Definitely want to check that out. Ms. Smith-Hunter.
Yes, Dr. Cotton's book is amazing. I know I've read it and I've learned so much. But in addition to that great resource, you definitely want to make sure that your classroom, your school, and your school district are not unconsciously committing equity fraud. And so I want to make sure that you are able to leave this conversation and begin to think about how can I make sure I am engineering an equitable ecosystem of teaching and learning, right? And you can be confident about it, unlike how we felt during the pandemic. And so let's think about what those 3 things are. So right now we see a lot of us tipping the iceberg, where we've changed our websites. We've included all those wonderful, the glitter words is what I call them, the right words to make it seem like we are on the diversity, equity, and inclusion train. I've also seen many school districts change the imagery that they have on their websites, as well as going back a number of years and finding all of the diversity that they have promoted into places of leadership over the past few years, right? But the question is, did anything really change if all you're doing is going back in history and regurgitating what happened and created the inequitable outcomes that we see today? And I'm sure you're all shaking your head. Absolutely not. You're just retelling the same narrative, but through, from a different perspective, right? And so in order to prevent to that, we want to make sure we're not just looking at the tip of the iceberg where we know the right keywords. We need to go a little bit deeper. We need to go deep underneath the surface to think about who are the people that we have on board and how are we helping them to gain that awareness? How are we building their capacity to learn more about not just those buzzwords, but what does it look, feel like, and what are the outcomes of doing it and not doing it, right? And on top of having the right people, which is great to have a whole lot of the right people in the building. And even if you have the wrong people in the building, if you have the right policies in place that actually give rewards and consequences for that diversity, equity, and instruction, you are on the path to building an equitable ecosystem. But if your policies contribute to inequities, we have some place to begin our work. Our practices are the next place, which is basically how our people engage with those policies, right? And we know that there are some hardcore policies that we follow to the T, right? And then there are other ones where people create their own, right? It happens, right? But how can we make those adjustments to make sure there is clear alignment to communicate that we don't just comply with diversity, equity, and inclusion by having keywords and that surface level things? We actually embrace it. And we make sure of it by making sure that our people are aligned with that vision. Our policies support that. And set up enablers and barrier and access for that to take place. And lastly, that our practices exude the belief that we believe that all students should feel accepted and have experiences that lead to phenomenal outcomes. And so in the book, Equity Outside of the Box, a framework for engaging diverse learners, you will learn all about those infrastructures. And on top of that, how do we add this when our plates are already full? We have to tap into positive psychology, because right now, 70% of adults, so that includes us teachers, also educators, right, are faced with psychological distress. And we all know the brain does not perform at its optimal level when we are under distress. So we really have to come in and partner with our teachers and make sure we're communicating in a way that provides them with that safety psychologically, which will then trickle down to our students. And we want to make sure we're creating those experiences that are produced from those equitable, engineering that equitable ecosystems in your schools and districts.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes.
So I want to hear one final wrap up or takeaway as we conclude our wonderful conversation. For those of you who are just joining us, this is just part one. We're just giving you the overview and some big nuggets to think about. And then on Thursday, we're going to dig a little bit deeper so that we can get some specific steps to make sure that we are engaging all learners. So again, today is just part one. This is our overview about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I want to hear from everyone. Just give us a final takeaway from our discussion today. We'll start with Ms. Erin.
No pressure, right?
No pressure.
So I was thinking about one thing that I really would like everyone to think about. And I think that it would be really essential for everyone, every educator who has multilingual learners or English learners in their classrooms to actually learn a little bit about second language acquisition. So people are always like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I can tell you things that you can do, but if you don't know why you're doing the things that you're doing, then it's moot. And I really think if you took if teachers and educators just had a little bit more training around and understanding around second language acquisition, they would understand how to make better decisions for their multilingual learners, their English learners in their classrooms.
Love it. Thank you so much, Erin, for joining us today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, I can't wait till Thursday. Dr. Cotton, what's a good takeaway from our discussion?
So I'm going to piggyback off Erin. The exact same thing she said for English language learners. It's the same thing for special education. You know, mindset change, you know, shifting the mindset and taking some time to see why the student is unable to learn like the average, and digging through the filters and find those things that motivate them, and teaching outside the box to make those connections. So the same thing, you know, you put yourself in the shoes of an ELL student, same thing with a student with disability. All these times, students with disabilities have had negative classroom experiences, and the parents have had negative experiences. So, you know, what can we do? One thing I researched and I found out as I was doing my second book was one positive relationship, and going back on that, can counteract all of the negativity a student has had. One positive relationship with a teacher can negate all of those negative experiences. So, yeah, be the light.
Be the light. Okay, love it. Love it. We may have to steal that one. Be the light. And then, of course, thanks again, Ms. Smith-Hunter, for rejoining us. What's the final takeaway?
I just, thank you so much, Dr. Cotton and Erin. That was the best answer. But it really makes me think about experiences, which is really what creating that ecosystem of equity is about. Tailoring an experience to make sure that individuals are successful. And I can just think, everyone can think back to when their parents told them something, right? You can't do this, and you didn't agree when you were a teenager, right? And they would say, you'll understand when you become a parent, right? And it's not until you become a parent and you're in that same situation and you're like, and that at that moment is when you really understood what that conversation was ages ago, right? So on top of all of the capacity building and training, we have to create an experience that will be life-changing for educators, so that they really understand, because when it happens to you, it just got real, right? And so how can we create those opportunities, like Dr. Cotton was saying? What does it feel like to have that negative experience? And I'm the multilingual parent, the parent of a multilingual student. What does that really feel like? And then how can we respond to that? And so when we change that mindset, we're able to really take our power back in our hands and create those environments that create those experiences where our multilingual learners and our students who are served with special education can soar.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. So thank you to all of our special guests for joining us today. And again, we can't wait to dig deeper on Thursday. To all of our viewers, be sure to put your questions in the comments so that all of our specialists can comment, and we can come back on Thursday and maybe talk about some of your questions or your concerns. So thanks again, and I'll see y'all on Thursday. All right, Dr. Jones, we did it.
Yes, Dr. Roz.
That was so good. So I cannot wait till Thursday so that we can ask more questions and really dig in and get some specifics for teachers as far as what they can do. Like, okay, I get it. I need to build relationships. I need to change my mindset. I care about my students. Over the summer break, we'll make sure that we learn more about the students in our classroom and in our schools, so that we can do better. Because again, we care about our students, but we know that we need to step it up and engage all learners and be intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Dr. Jones, what's some of your final thoughts?
So I love the quote that I wrote down was, hope doesn't get kids to mastery, which is like, yes, hope, faith, or love. You can love your kids right to daggone failure. And so we can't just rely upon our passion and all. We got to read some things. We have to stay engaged. We have to read books. Our summer is not off. When people say the teachers have the summer off, that is the biggest joke in the world, because I'm always reading. I'm trying to figure out how can I make this better. And I'm allegedly a master teacher. You know what I mean? So if I'm working to make it better, I know that it has to be a process for everyone. So I'm thinking about all the books. I ordered one of the books just now. I'm super excited to dig in. So it's like figuring out what works and putting these things to practice. So it's about taking your passion and moving it to something that's actually feasible, doable, and that's really going to move kids. If you look up and you see all your kids who are special needs in this one class, or all your kids who are ELL, none of those kids ever had gifted or never had anything creative writing. We're not getting to our kids. And so we really have to figure out better ways to look at data. So I think that's what I want to go to. What data are we using, and how are we using it to really ask the hard questions, and how are we challenging ourselves to really explore our biases, and what does that mean in our classrooms?
Ooh. Well, I'm glad we have a part 2 coming up on Thursday. So listen, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in today with The Village and hanging out with your girl, Dr. Roz and Dr. Jones, as we ask the tough questions, because again, teacher leaders, we're passionate, And we want to make sure that we're always improving our practice because we love the students, but we also want to make sure that we're always improving what we do so that our students can succeed. So continue to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Village LG. Okay, I'll say it again, at The Village LG, and click that link somewhere around here so that you can join the village. Okay, join the village. What you waiting for? We are a professional learning community committed to work together to share and make sure that iron sharpens iron and we are doing our thing as teacher leaders. Let's support one another. All right, so we'll see you guys on Thursday for part 2. Dr. Jones, you coming on Thursday? All right, guys. See y'all later. Remember, teacher leadership is a what? Mindset, not a position. See y'all on Thursday.
Bye.